This piece is part of a series, my Monster Maiden series, and this is number 2 with 2 monsters. Just have a look at it. I think it's a little unusual. I invented these monsters, and part of the way I did it was using ZBrush, which is 3D software. I wanted to have a little different approach and more three-dimensional effects and shading than in my first piece, which we're about to look at. This was Monster Maiden number 1, and I did this pretty much just by painting directly in color, digitally, in Photoshop, and then I finished it up in Painter. If you look at this one's very expressionistic, impressionistic. It's got a lot of feeling to it, I think. There's this creature outside somewhere. I don't know, it has that kind of post-nuclear Holocaust feel about it. But it's got tentacles, it's a little comic, it seems to have a bubble of something coming out of its nose. It seems sentient, seems to be suffering, have some sort of self-consciousness, self-reflectivity. It seems to be aware of its condition. I like the trees in the background. But looking at this, it has a sense, which is fine for this one, but that you're looking directly at it. So if this was taken with the camera would be facing straight at it. And I wanted to get a little more 3D effects. Also, while it works here, the eyes are mostly just white. There's a little shading on the underside of the eye, the eyeball itself, but they're mostly just white. I wanted to get more color and shading. Also, other parts of the body I would like a little more shading. I tried to do shading, but I wanted to make it a little more intense, and I wanted to make things more three-dimensional in the next piece. So I decided to teach myself ZBrush, which is an organic way of doing modeling. Here's a close-up of the eyes. You can see just a little shading on the eyeball in the lower left. It's hard to do the whiter areas, impasto, in the digital impasto style I use, because it tends not to look well, so I have to take out some of the shading on the white. So I'm trying to figure out how to not get the whites too whitewashed. But there you have it, some nice expressionist brush strokes. Here you can see the tentacles, part of the lower jaw. Really do a lot of work on trying to get a good feel there. Here's the background of that one, which is a lot like an expressionist or impressionist landscape, though it's a little different, a little odd because it's done digitally. Some of the techniques are the same. I do it individual strokes at a time. In this case, I did them, probably each stroke is done 3 times. It's done in layers and different coats and things. And I have a drawing and painting background. This is not easy to do. It's quite difficult. But I don't need to have canvas and paint and take it along with me everywhere. Don't have to worry about storing it or permanence. So you have that nice background. So the next one, here's the beginning where I was doing it in ZBrush with it, which I just learned, and I'm getting a hang of it. It's also not an easy program. So it's much easier than Blender, which I've used before, but isn't as good for organic sculpting, at least I don't think so. So this is where it started. You got the big bug eyes, you got sort of a dog muzzle going on it, open mouth, oversized eyes, a bit insectoid, and maybe a little alien. Wanted to come up with my own creature. Here it's come along a lot further, got antennas on it, eyelids, some weird feelery things coming out of the muzzle, indentations, there's teeth in there. It's starting to look really creepy, kind of early Outer Limits, black and white sci-fi television. I like that feel a lot. Here's a little later, I figured out how to put eyelashes on it. It's not the same way I did those other ridges. Those I did individually. The eyelashes, there's a special feature to play around with it a lot, try and figure it out. to enable me to do that. You can customize it, but it's coming along quite good there. I think it's really kind of scary and creepy and weird, bee-like. And then here you can see the full body, and it's looking good. Some good shading, but I wasn't getting quite as much 3D in ZBrush as I could get in Blender, so I decided to take the figure into Blender. But I got this other idea, which is that once I had one, I mean, the great thing about doing this as opposed to drawing something or conventional media is once you have one, you can angle it and try different angles and find the angle you like. But another thing you can do is copy it. So I decided to do that and put a second one in there. Worked on the composition for a while. Here it's in Blender because it was more 3D. You have a little more control of lighting, three-dimensional effects, camera angles, and all that. Then I had to put it in color. Here it is in Photoshop, and I made everything blue at this stage, which I quite liked. It seemed like something like you passed out on a hot day and you saw this. And I like that it's looking up at them, like looking up at a sky, but I thought it lacked color. I wanted to go a little more natural. In this version, you're getting more of like a tannish tones with blues and pinks. The eyes are kind of pink. One person commented on my blog that this looked like E.T. softcore, which I thought was kind of funny. I'll talk more about why that is in a bit. Let's look at some close-ups. Here's a close-up of one head by the side. You can see the brush strokes here. It's got a real, like a Hopper-esque feel to it, the way I painted it. I really like the eye, the pink eye with the blue ring. It's just something that came about in the process of experimentation, that the iris has different colors of pinks and reds in it. There's nice shading on the eye to make it more rounded. It's not just white. Threw some veins in there. The teeth I quite like on this figure, not as much on the other one. I tried really hard with both, but this one, it has a nice feeling of the texture and lighting on the teeth. You can see the background. It's got a nice sort of stucco feel to it. Here's a close-up of the main head, and quite like the eyes. They're luminous. It was hard to go from the 3D sculpture, which is solid, looks solid, to make it kind of luminous. And it's quite unusual and original. I look at this and I keep forgetting that I invented this creature. It seems like it came from somewhere else, but it's just come about through this process that I hoped would happen, like using 3D sculpting as a way to create a creature would be different than doing it like the last one, just painting it directly. Of course, there's all sorts of hybrids I can try in the future. There's a close-up of the eye. Bit of like an ostrich eye because of the eyelashes, I think, or a cassowary. And here's a close-up of the boobs. Now you may be wondering, oh, and some nice tentacles. Came out pretty good. And you may be wondering, why do these monsters have boobs? It might seem ridiculous. It kind of is, and it kind of is a parody. Basically, it's hard to get any representation in the art world if you're just working on your own and uploading your images to your own site. It's really grassroots, and not a lot of people are going to ever discover it. So you have to try and be picked up by other sites that have much more following, somewhat of a reputation, like Juxtapose. There's a few more, and I've submitted work to them, but they didn't seem interested. And I noticed that what always gets in is the NSFW, not safe for work type things, even if they're not that great. It's just like a shoo-in. So if you got boobs, you got some sort of sex going on, they tend to look at that and accept it. So the reason for the boobs is kind of a Trojan horse to get people to look at my work, spend some time with it, give it some thought, start to notice things about it, like that it's digital impasto, or it's a bit different. It's a hybrid of fine art and popular art, things that you don't normally associate together, like sci-fi and expressionism, digital and impasto. There's influences of people like Francis Bacon in it, and Hopper even. So if people spend more time with it, they'll start to see these things where at first, if it doesn't look really familiar, people, I think, tend to reject it. And though this one people seem to like, because I guess it does have some sort of familiarity to it, because it's so realistically depicted. And another opposite, you have attraction, repulsion. It's kind of sexy, but the heads are really not, especially the first one. It's disgusting. Second one is quite a thing you'd be frightened of. So putting the boobs in is kind of punking the art world. It's not something I would normally do. It's not something that I would do gratuitously. It's done knowingly, with irony. But of course I also need to do it well. It needs to be alluring and horrific at the same time, and raise questions. It's not critical of women. Some people might see it like, oh, women are monsters. It's more critical of men in the art world. It's nothing against women. I quite like women. No problems with women. So that's not the issue. But I saw this series as a way to just be really imaginative, thinking of different kinds of monsters with influences from the 50s, or just pulling out of my head. It can be psychedelic, it can have quasi-spiritual overtones, it could be some interdimensional being, and throwing in the boobs just adds an element that sometimes could be funny, could be a little edgy, could be slightly erotic. So all those things together seem like promising enough a series that I could pursue it without becoming bored, because I generally don't like to work in a series. I like to try new things and keep experimenting. But here I'm trying to do a series. This is number 2. Number 3 is on the way. Stay tuned.